Transportation is something that is usually talked about only due to its flaws in Minecraft. In the modern day, there is practically nothing that can compete from the speed, maneuverability, and efficiency of flying with an Elytra and rockets. But a decade ago, the Elytra firework rocket combo did not exist, and this caused a much more diverse meta. Both horses and boats were extremely viable depending on if you were traveling on land or sea, and you could even get by walking. Not only that, but the terrain was also much more compact, which has had profound implications and still has implications up to this day. This is the history of transportation on my Minecraft Forever world, and this is how I got around throughout the ages. I will skip to 2016 in this video as there is not much before I move to my current location. Really, the only way I got around is by sprinting, but in a different way. At the time, food was much more scarce, so I would only sprint in dangerous situations and walk everywhere else. And before all of you lore connoisseurs run into my comments section and mention my Pigs for Cobblestone shop, I did not ride them. Even at that time, I knew that riding them was so useless that even I did not want to touch them. When I moved out of the temporary building I shared with my brother, I settled to where I am now. Before it was built, it was a tiny peninsula, about 30 blocks or so long and 10 blocks wide, poking out in the middle of an ocean. And this will become the western end of my forever base. The peninsula faced away from 0-0, but it was also very close to there. So if I walked inland, I'd basically be walking closer to that point, meaning that there's going to be more people that direction essentially. This also meant that sailing directly the other way out into the ocean, I'd be going directly away from it to areas with less people. Now, not only this, but if you look at a map, you'll notice that the shape of the ocean around the peninsula I settled is like a bowl shape, with two cul-de-sacs on the southwest and northwestern side. Now, I did not know at this time, but this probably has to have been one of the most perfect locations geographically to settle in the entire server. It is probably why I kept playing, and more importantly, lived in the same place for so long. The formation of the terrain made both land and sea travel very viable. Not only that, but I was also near a lot of other people's bases, with a land connection, like said, to the highest concentration, which, despite most of them being inactive, is still really cool just to look around and tour. And I just sometimes do that when I'm bored. The vast expanses of ocean eastward of my base made it super easy for me to expand outward. And the old terrain, like I said, condensed biomes, so it was easier to get different saplings of, different kinds of wood. And also, even though most of the area around was deforested, the area which was to the south of my base was not. So I could just sail over there and collect wood that way. Now, at the time, I would not take a direct route. Instead, I would just go around the edge. So it took longer, but it still is a very good way of just getting lots of wool. Another advantage with old terrain is that it spawned mobs much more frequently than the new one, which made it super easy for breeding them or just getting eggs from chickens. This also applied with taming horses and donkeys as well. The compacted terrain also made it much easier to make bridges and canals to connect different areas around it, to make it easier to travel by both land and sea to areas further away. And also the dense nature of builds did kind of have an advantage, as you could kind of share resources such as crops. You kind of break them and then you replant them. And you could also get certain saplings and seeds and that sort of stuff in a similar way as well, which also would save some time. And there's obviously the fact that you could also trade with another active player nearby. But despite all of these advantages, there are some disadvantages. First, this. Yeah, do I even need to say anything? I remember one person saw it and described it as a single person trying to fight 10 withers at once. And I think that's pretty accurate. And even excluding these cumulative creeper explosions, old generation is just not as pretty, and also lacks vital, more recent resources in modern Minecraft, such as copper. And also, since so many people here have been on here at one time or another, practically everyone is fighting for even the most basic resources, especially non-renewable ones, which also made mining, and especially mining diamonds, super difficult. But overall, most of the disadvantages were not even related to the terrain layout itself, and it was a very good place to settle. Almost immediately, I started using boat travel a lot. Now, most of the time, I would go south, parallel to the shore, so I would dock them on the peninsula outside of my claim until I figured out a more permanent solution. It also wasn't anywhere near as hard to get around my base at the time for, well, obvious reasons. So this setup ended up working decently. And I also found out that foot travel on land was good enough when going west, so I didn't even really need a horse at the time. Once I got my main house and paths around it built, I started to debate as to where to put a more permanent dock, and whether I would have one or two. I decided to make a tiny enclave on the south side through the pathway to make one. It could only hold 2 or 3 boats maximum, but it was sufficient for the time. And with the pathway, I decided to make a small bridge that went over it. I also chose the south because my brother's base was that direction, and we both played with each other a lot around the time. It was a clever solution, especially for the time, but one thing I wouldn't do that I would regret really badly later on is make one on the other side. This would be my setup for a long time, but as 2017 came and as the base expanded outward, the lack of a way to bring boats to the north side bothered me more and more. There was an area on the other side that could be used as a dock, but I was more and more wanting to just connect them. So I would go in a direction that I haven't yet, and that is down. The idea was that there would be a canal that would curve in a sort of cashew shape, roughly underneath the main build of my base that would connect these 2 ports. And how I would use this at this time, because bubble vaders didn't exist, is I would use certain glitches in the game to create a boat elevator. There's only one problem though. Where would I place my boats? If that's just going to turn into a canal, where am I storing my boats? To try to deal with that, I decided to extend my dock outward, but with much more arbitrary boundaries. I would light up the area with these cobblestone blocks with torches on top, and I would have 2 diorite barriers, with one of them being attached to the island that was on the edge of my claim. And to be clear, this is not the same island as the evil island, as that island is completely artificial. This island will eventually be incorporated inside of the base with the obelisk on top. And now it kind of just gives some depth on the side. So I started building and draining. I was doing it at a surprising efficiency, especially at that time, because sponges didn't exist, or at least maybe they did, although they were really new, so I didn't have any. Basically how I did it was I think I filled in the entire area with sand to get rid of the water. So yeah, it took a very long time. I also am pretty sure I drowned a lot from doing it as well, if I remember correctly. Once I was done, I broke the blocks beneath the ports to connect both sides, flooded the floor, and built the water elevators. Tried to build the water elevators. Yeah, the entire thing had to be scrapped completely due to one inconvenience. The area would turn into basement for a main building. So the reason has exactly to do with the boat elevator bug that I was talking about. This bug has basically existed for a super long time, although right before I started building it, it was patched. So I had no way at all to lift boats up. This had to be one of the most devastating failures I've ever had in the history of me playing this game. And I am lucky that it is recorded on this world. As 2018 came by, another dimension was becoming more of a concern, and that was eastward. My base was expanding so much that it became pretty difficult to go from one end to the other. And that totally helped me with my problems with the dock and going northward as well. I just gave up at that point on that end. I did get a horse around this time, but it was only an average speed one, as I wasn't too concerned with like a perfect one. But that really didn't solve the main issue at all, especially due to the fact that the horse stable was built on the expanded side. So I decided to go old school, and in specific, minecarts. I will have a rail which would go from my main building to near the end of the claim on the other side. It will wrap around just north of all of the buildings on that side, and it will end up kind of near where the hotels are now. Once it was done, I rode on it, and I realized that it didn't make a big difference at all, especially since it went the wrong way for a tiny portion. I would use it though until my break due to it being more convenient, but it would end up serving a completely different purpose in the future, and that is a location for the border wall 5 years later. One of the first things I did when I got back to the server was making a unifying border around the base. Even though I was starting to push to the ends of my claim, some of them were still unclear, especially the north-south axis. So I wanted to make it look uniform while also doubling down being super functional navigating around by boat. So I came up with the shape you see now, which is basically just a giant D. The north side was trimmed short at the minecart rail at the edge, while the south side was curved, with the furthest out part being the incorporated island. The exit for the dock was placed just west of the island, marked by these soul flame torches. The reason why the shape was chosen was because when I would sail boats outward, it would give a smooth curve in theory if I sailed both ways, which would also in theory make it easier to get to the north side. You might have noticed the in theory part I left in, and that is because how am I going to be able to get to the other side going right? Well, I wouldn't. At least for 6 months. Another part of the reason why it was curved on the near side in particular is to create a new cul-de-sac on the southwestern side. But in early 2024, I would make 2 massive developments in this area. The first is the Evil Island, which created this narrow passage inside of my claim between the two that can also function as a place to park boats. But more importantly, I was also just barely able to fit a small canal at the very edge of my base that connected both ends of the peninsula. Even though not the most glamorous, it was still super efficient, allowing me to get to the enclave on the northwestern side very easily, and I think this was just a very fitting way to end the sort of 8-year struggle to get from one side to the other. There's only one downside to all this though, and that's that the Evil Island is just a tiny bit too big on the side closest to the canal that you have to wiggle the boat that you're riding in between it. But I tried to optimize it as much, and I couldn't find a viable solution without that happening. It was also at this time that I got a donkey to get a mule. This idea was actually from a different world I was in when I traveled by mule a lot, and I personally liked the knapsack a lot, at least a lot more than horse travel. Even though my mule was a bit slower than my horse, the fact that I could store stuff, like I said, on the knapsack was super useful, and it became my favorite way of getting places. It should also be noted that I raised the land in some places around this time which slightly altered the path that I would sail. Surprisingly, almost nothing will happen when it comes to transportation for the next 2 years. I was super content with the setup I had, and to be honest, the setup was pretty close to what I have now. I did replace some of the boats with chests, but this surprisingly did not make much of a difference. In fact, most of the time the boats were empty, and that is despite them having more storage than a mule. The thing was that I just didn't need to use them for the storage purpose very often, and if I wanted to transport some goods, I would almost always use my mule. I also did a tiny change to my land setup, and that is by using donkeys. Something I did not know until around this time is that donkeys will get faster the more times you breed them, so I wanted to utilize this to its maximum by trying to get a few donkeys as fast as possible. Not only would they be faster, jump higher, and easier to replace, but I could also sell them. The donkeys were much faster than the slow mule I used to have, and it was super easy to get places on the land now. The donkey can also jump up a 5-block cliff, which was also super nice. And this would extend to almost 8 blocks as well, with a jump boost potion. And there was one final development that happened during my last video. The dock was completely renovated and modernized, which did come out with a lot of changes, but at the same time most were minor. But there was one which was a huge game changer, and that was the new boat parking garage. I am now able to store many more boats than I ever was able to before then, and it can also connect areas underground to the dock on the surface in the future. But you might have noticed that I've purposely left out one thing in this video so far, and that is elytra travel. And the reality was that I actually do not travel by elytra a lot at all. Really, the only time I would do that is if I was not at my base, in fact, and I was traveling in an area which was really far away. I did get it in 2023, and really a lot of the reason why is because everything is just so close that you don't even really need it. Especially rockets, you don't really even need rockets just to get around, which I've always just found so fascinating. And due to this fact, I gave my chest plate a very special name. And that is the history of transportation on Oddcraft. This is something that I don't think will have very many updates in the near future, a lot like the past couple years. Most of the changes though would probably be related to boat path changes due to changing terrain around my base, but I would like to get into this more in a different video. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and dislike if you dislike, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. Peace out!